Welcome to our block time video. In this block time video, we're going to be focusing on storing our game settings. So let me show you what I mean by going to our designer here. Essentially, when we click on any one of these buttons here from any of our groups, we want to ensure that we store the appropriate setting for whatever kind of mode, paddle length, or movement we've selected. So just like we did for our screen 1 when we selected speedball or shrinkball, we're going to do the same thing for our setting screen. So I'm going to go to my block section in my screen 1 just to show you the formula we're going to be following. So you'll notice that here we say, okay, go to our tiny database and store under the game mode tag speed if we've clicked on speedball, right? That's a setting. If we clicked on the shrink ball button, then store under the game mode tag shrink, right? So when we get into our game screen, we know if we are going to play speedball or shrink ball, right? So we're just going to follow the same formula for our setting screen. We're going to go to settings and we're going to say, okay, when random ball color button is clicked, go to our tiny database, store a value, and that value is going to be, we're just going to make up a tag here that represents our color mode. We're going to just say, let's call it color mode. That would make a lot of sense, I think. So the value we want to store for the color mode tag, in this case, we'll say random. That's going to be our unique identifier to show that we want to play the random ball color mode, right? So now we're just going to duplicate the store value block, and we're going to do the same thing for our change on hit button. We're going to say for our change on hit button, when they want to play with the change on hit color mode, store instead of color mode, or rather instead of random, store the value on hit. And for our select color button, we're actually going to be doing something very similar, right? We're going to be storing a value as well, but we're going to be focusing on what value that is in another video. So I'm going to leave this blank for right now, right? But rest assured, in one of our following videos, we're going to be taking care of storing our select color value. So now we're just going to be doing the same thing for our second group. So for our paddle length group, right? We're going to store a value under the tag. Instead of color mode now, it's going to be paddle length, right? And the value we're going to store in this case is going to be small, right? Because we clicked on the small button. And it should make sense to you then that if we click on the medium button, we don't want to store the small tag, but we want to store the medium tag, right? This is just a way of remembering whatever settings they have selected. So now if they've stored, or if they've clicked on the large button, if that's the one selected, we want to store the large tag, right? And the same is true for our paddle movement, right? Instead of paddle length for the tag, we want to store paddle mode, right? And the same thing for this one, paddle mode. And now the value to store for our opposite button, we're just going to say opposite. And the value to store for our same button is just going to be same, right? So we're storing all this stuff essentially every time they click on a button. Actually, you know what? Let me pull up my phone here so I can show you. I'm going to reconnect and I'm going to show you exactly how this is going to work. Just in case there's any confusion, I just want to clarify. So we'll connect here, and this is what's going to happen. Essentially, when I click on random, it'll say, okay, hey, go and store under the tag color mode random. If I were to click change, it'll say, hey, overwrite the color mode tag to on hit, right? So for example, for our paddle length, if I were to click on small, it would say store under the paddle length tag small. If I were to click on large, it'd say, hey, overwrite the paddle length to large. And the same is true for paddle movement. If I click on any of these paddle movement buttons, it'll say, hey, store under the paddle mode tag same. If I were to click on opposite, it'll overwrite it with opposite. So the reason we're storing all this stuff is so when we get into our game screen, it'll say, hey, give me what's under the paddle length tag, give me what's under the paddle mode tag, and lastly, give me what's under the color mode tag, and I'll set up the game appropriate to whatever settings they've input. So I hope this makes sense, guys. We've successfully stored our game settings for all but one of our settings. I will see you in the next video.